Andy Warhol was born Andrew Warhola on August 6, 1928 in Pittsburgh. His parents were immigrants from Slovakia. Together with two older brothers, he grew up in Soho in a two-room apartment in the poorest of circumstances. Warhol became one of the most important American artists of the 60s and is regarded as something like the inventor of pop art. In this film, I would like to use Warhol to explain the hoarder syndrome from the perspective of Germanische Heilkunde. The hoarder behavior results from SBS of the liver. The hoarder is characterized by the fact that they collect objects and cannot part with them. They do not differentiate between the value of the individual objects. If their home environment does not offer enough space for their collecting mania, their home becomes increasingly cluttered. In extreme cases, they clutter up their entire home with stuff. As always, a little theory first. The liver has tissue types that have developed from the inner liver parenchyma and outer liver bile duct germ layers. The liver therefore has two different conflict contents with two different SBS. Hoarder syndrome is caused by the liver parenchyma SBS of the yellow group. The DHS Dirk-Hammer syndrome is an event in which the person affected has experienced starvation. Nowadays, this is often figurative starvation, usually of a financial nature. For example, due to a job termination, divorce, etc. Of course, there are also real biological starvation DHS. For example, due to a job termination, divorce, etc. Of course, there are also real biological starvation DHS. For example, a diagnosis of intestinal cancer can be a DHS starvation, as the diagnosis is associated with no longer being able to eat. In conventional medicine, this is referred to as intestinal cancer having spread to the liver. For the cause of SBS of the liver parenchyma, I refer to the video scientific table. In addition to the processes described in scientific table, here is some more specific information. The liver has the ability to regrow. This means that the missing tissue can rebuild itself after an encyclic, polycyclic, or hanging healing process. The ancient Greeks already knew this and incorporated it into their legend of Prometheus. Typhoid fever has a hammer focus in the liver gland tissue, so occurs in the healing of a starvation conflict. Analogous to the lungs, film George Harrison, the liver gets several round foci when you have starvation around you. If you have starvation around someone else, you only get one round focus. I cannot say whether the starvation basically triggers the collecting mania symptom or whether another SBS must also be involved. But I would almost guess that it is, since behavioral problems are largely the result of a constellation. In any case, hoarder syndrome must have SBS of the liver parenchyma. Now to Andy Warhol. If you take a closer look at Warhol, it quickly becomes clear that he must have had multiple territorial constellations. He was homosexual, so he had occupied the male and female territorial loss relay and was therefore in a post-mortem constellation. The strikingly close bond with his mother suggests that she must have played the decisive role in his first territorial conflict. Warhol was also in an autistic constellation. He worked on his pictures rigidly in the same way every time. The processes were repeated regularly. He changed one and the same picture only minimally and then put them next to each other to create its own artwork. This became his trademark, so to speak. For his first solo exhibition, for example, he produced 32 almost identical pictures of a can of soup. He said of himself, "It's great to copy yourself, and I love doing the same thing over and over again." To recognize that Warhol was an artist, all you have to do is enter Warhol images into Google Images and look at the identical suggestions. And I think he will also have been in the Flyer constellation. This is shown by his superstitious streak. He had healers talk him into $10,000 crystals that were supposed to heal his gallbladder by applying them. He was told that they had previously been charged by the energy of the pyramids of Giza or the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, it didn't help. Now to his collecting mania. Here are a few quotes from the biography Warhol Alive as Art by Blake Gopnik. That he started shopping for at least 2 to 3 hours every day. But they don't understand why I shop every day. I buy so many things, and I bet they can't understand. You think I don't know what they think. I just throw the stuff in the basket. I don't know what all. And what do I do with it? I don't know. I have no idea. Warhol collected all kinds of everyday objects, whether knickknacks, junk, or treasures, not matter how much they cost. Boxes of pressed glass vases, jugs with copper plating, Victorian card boxes. He had the things brought to his house and they remained there until his death, some of them not even unpacked. Anyone can work out what at home looks like when you spend 2 to 3 hours shopping every day for years. So Warhol had a starvation conflict with hoarder symptoms. Let us now embark on a search for the starvation conflict. But his collecting activities were derailed in the year after the attack. After the 1968 assassination, Warhol was a different person. From then on, he was prone to a compulsive buying and collecting mania, which was reflected in both his work and his private life. Although the artist suffered from a lifelong fear of falling into poverty again, there was hardly a flea market in New York that was spared him and where he did not have to buy at least one item, as he once described in his notes. So the collecting frenzy began after an attempt on his life in 1968. Let's take a closer look. In the mid-60s, a new woman appeared at Warhol's factory. Her name was Valerie Solanas, and she was a radical feminist with fanatical fantasies of abolishing men. The cause of her madness must have been the sexual abuse by her father. On June 3, 1968, she appeared in the new rooms of Warhol's factory and shot Warhol several times. She shot him in the upper body at close range. Warhol was taken to hospital, bleeding profusely and half dead. He survived the emergency operation that followed, although he had to be resuscitated in between. So, could the assassination have been the DHS for the starvation conflict? No, that's very unlikely. Such an event will biologically go in the direction of fear or attack. Still, it must have had something to do with it, because after that, his gathering frenzy started. So let's keep looking. What were the consequences of the shot? Rossi found even more devastation. The connection from the esophagus to the stomach was severed. The left lobe of the liver was crushed. Solana's bullet had also left terrible holes in Warhol's intestines, and the injured lobe of the liver was also a hopeless case. The shot had destroyed Warhol's entire digestive tract. This and the resulting future difficulties with food intake will certainly have been communicated to him after the operation. This is where the starvation DHS is to be found. Due to the physical consequences of the gunshot wound to his digestive tract, Warhol had repeated problems with food intake after the operation and for the rest of his life. A doctor friend of his recalled that he did indeed have problems eating later on. In another note, he mentions that Warhol had difficulty eating enough and putting weight again. His entire system had been massively affected by the gunshot wound, with years of eating problems and weight loss, which didn't get better. The hoarder is, so to speak, stopping up for a rainy day. This is the biological meaning behind the SBS and explains its compulsive behavior. How do you resolve conflicts psychologically, e.g., by means of behavioral therapy, or emotionally, e.g., by means of stroking, or organically, e.g., by applying crystals? It doesn't work because the cause is not psychological, emotional, or organic, but biological. This difference is important to understand. And how can you biologically save a starvation conflict when, like Warhol, you have real problems with food intake on a daily basis? This is almost impossible, even with the knowledge of the connections discovered by Dr. Hamer. If, on the other hand, his starvation conflict had been of a financial nature, he could have solved it in no time at all by selling a few paintings. Knowing all this, it's no wonder that Warhol was a hoarder for the rest of his life. Warhol died in February 87, one day after a gallbladder operation. Thank you for your colorful pictures. Rest in peace.